The morning I found the violation notice stuck to my front door, I was still in my boxers holding a cup of coffee, trying to figure out why my neighbors across the street were staring at my house like I'd painted it neon pink overnight. I'm Connor Caldwell, and I'd been living in the Riverside Meadows subdivision in Gilbert, Arizona for exactly 8 months. The place seemed perfect when I bought it, a quiet community with well-maintained homes, decent neighbors, and a homeowners association that the realtor assured me was very reasonable. That last part turned out to be the biggest lie I'd ever been told, and I've dated women who said they were fine when they clearly weren't. The notice was printed on official-looking letterhead with the Riverside Meadows HOA logo at the top. Bold red letters screamed "Violation Notice" across the page. According to the document, I was being fined $250 for displaying an unauthorized flag on my property. The flag in question was a standard 3 by 5 foot American flag hanging from a bracket mounted next to my garage. I stared at the paper, reading it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. My grandfather had given me that flag at his retirement ceremony from the Marine Corps 20 years ago. It was one of the few things I had left from him after he passed away 2 years back. The flag had flown at his house in Tucson for decades, and when I finally bought my own place, putting it up was the first thing I did after unpacking the kitchen boxes. I called the HOA office immediately. A woman answered on the 3rd ring with a voice that could freeze lava. "Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association, this is Brenda speaking." "Hi, Brenda. My name is Connor Caldwell. I live at 4782 Sycamore Drive, and I just got a violation notice about my American flag. There must be some mistake." "No mistake, Mr. Caldwell. Your flag violates Section 7, subsection C of our community guidelines. All exterior decorations require prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. It's an American flag. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 is federal law. HOAs can't prohibit residents from displaying the flag." Brenda's tone didn't change, but I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "The law states that reasonable restrictions may apply regarding size, placement, and manner of display. Your flag exceeds the approved dimensions of 2 feet by 3 feet, and the mounting location was not pre-approved. The fine stands. You have 15 days to remove the flag or face additional penalties of $50 per day." I felt my blood pressure rising. "I want to speak to whoever's in charge of this committee." That would be Mrs. Cynthia Carmichael, our HOA president. "She's available by appointment only. I can schedule you for next Thursday at 2 in the afternoon." "Next Thursday? That's 9 days from now." Mrs. Carmichael's a very busy woman. That's the earliest available slot. I hung up without saying goodbye, which my mother would have scolded me for, but I was too angry to care about phone etiquette. I stood on my front lawn, looking at the flag snapping in the Arizona breeze, and decided that Brenda and Mrs. Carmichael could go straight to hell. I wasn't taking down my grandfather's flag. The next morning, I woke up to another notice. This one informed me that I was being fined an additional $100 for aggressive and threatening language toward HOA staff. Apparently, hanging up on Brenda counted as threatening behavior. I was now in the hole for $350, and I hadn't even met the infamous Cynthia Carmichael yet. I did what any rational person would do in 2025. I posted about it on social media. Within hours, the story had been shared hundreds of times. Local news outlets started calling. By that evening, a reporter from Channel 12 News was standing in my driveway asking me to tell her about the flag situation while a cameraman filmed my house. "This isn't about HOA rules," I told the reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Park. "This is about respect for veterans and the freedom to display our national flag. My grandfather served this country for 30 years, and this flag meant everything to him. No HOA board is going to intimidate me into taking it down." The story aired that night during the 6 o'clock news. By midnight, my phone was blowing up with messages of support from people I hadn't talked to in years. My neighbor 2 houses down, an older guy named Frank Martinez, who I'd only spoken to a handful of times, knocked on my door the next morning. "Saw you on the news," Frank said. He was maybe 70, with leathery skin from decades in the Arizona sun and eyes that had seen some things. "Good for you, standing up to those vultures. That Cynthia woman has been making everyone's life miserable since she got elected president 3 years ago. Most folks are too scared to fight back. Scared of an HOA president? Frank laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. You haven't met her yet. Just wait. She's got the whole board in her pocket, and she runs this place like her personal kingdom. Last year, she fined the Hendersons $5,000 because their teenage son's car leaked oil on their driveway. $5,000 for a stain. They ended up having to sell their house and move. I felt a chill despite the morning heat. That's insane. That's Cynthia. Watch your back, Connor. She doesn't like losing, and she definitely doesn't like bad publicity. Frank's warning turned out to be prophetic. The following day, I received 3 more violation notices. According to the HOA, my grass was 1 inch too tall, my mailbox had a small scratch that needed immediate repair, and my garbage cans were visible from the street for 17 minutes, longer than the allowed time frame on trash collection day. Each violation came with a $200 fine. I was now looking at over $1,000 in fines, and I'd only lived here 8 months. I called a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Samuel Chen, and he specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Phoenix, a modest suite in a building that had seen better days. Samuel was in his 40s, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he listened to my story while taking notes on a legal pad. The flag issue is pretty straightforward, Samuel said after I finished. The federal law is on your side, and Arizona has additional state protections for flag display. The other fines are harassment, plain and simple. We can fight this, but I need to be honest with you. HOA cases can drag on for months, sometimes years. Even when you win, legal fees can exceed the fines themselves. So what do you recommend? Samuel leaned back in his chair. Attend the meeting with Mrs. Carmichael. Record everything if Arizona's a one-party consent state for recordings, which it is. Document every interaction, save every email and notice, take photos with timestamps. If they continue the harassment, we file a complaint and possibly pursue a lawsuit for targeted harassment and violation of federal law. But Connor, be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better. People like this Cynthia Carmichael don't back down easily. Thursday finally arrived, and I drove to the HOA office for my 2 o'clock appointment. The office was located in a small commercial building near the entrance to our subdivision, sharing space with a dentist's office and a tax preparation service. The HOA suite was marked by a brass plaque and a door with frosted glass. Inside, Brenda sat at a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a 1990s corporate office. She was exactly what I expected, middle-aged, with dyed blonde hair styled in that specific soccer mom cut, wearing too much makeup and a blouse with a pattern that hurt my eyes. She looked up from her computer with an expression that suggested I was a bug she wanted to step on. Mr. Caldwell, you're 3 minutes late. I checked my phone. It was 2:02. Sorry, traffic. Mrs. Carmichael will see you now. Brenda gestured to a door behind her desk without another word. Cynthia Carmichael's office was surprisingly large for an HOA president. The walls were covered with framed photos of the subdivision, certificates of appreciation from various community organizations, and what looked like awards for Neighborhood of the Year from local magazines. Cynthia herself sat behind a heavy wooden desk that probably cost more than my first car. She was in her late 40s, with dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, a navy blue pantsuit that screamed middle management, and the kind of smile that made you want to count your fingers after shaking her hand. She didn't stand when I entered. Mr. Caldwell, please, sit down. Her voice was smooth, controlled, and absolutely devoid of warmth. I understand you're upset about our recent enforcement actions. I'm upset that you're trying to fine me for displaying an American flag, yes. It's protected by federal law. Cynthia's smile didn't waver. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act does allow for reasonable restrictions, Mr. Caldwell. Our community has standards, and those standards exist to maintain property values for all residents. Your flag, while patriotic, exceeds our dimensional requirements. We simply ask that you replace it with an appropriately sized flag. We'll even waive the fine if you comply within 7 days. The flag was my grandfather's. He was a Marine for 30 years. I'm not taking it down or replacing it. The smile finally cracked, just slightly. Mr. Caldwell, I've been president of this HOA for 3 years. In that time, we've transformed Riverside Meadows from an average subdivision into one of the most desirable communities in Gilbert. Property values have increased by 18%. We've won multiple awards. This success is due to our commitment to maintaining high standards. When residents refuse to follow the rules, it threatens everything we've built. We're talking about an American flag, Mrs. Carmichael, not a political banner or a decorative element, the symbol of our country. We're talking about rules that every resident agreed to follow when they purchased their home. You signed the HOA agreement, Mr. Caldwell. That signature means you agreed to abide by our guidelines. Cynthia leaned forward, her hands folded on the desk. Let me be very clear. If you continue to refuse compliance, the fines will continue to accumulate. We will place a lien on your property. Eventually, we can force a sale to recover our costs. I've done it before, and I'll do it again if necessary. This isn't personal. It's simply business. The way she said it made my skin crawl. There was something off about this woman, something beyond the typical power-tripping HOA president stereotype. The office itself felt wrong, too fancy, too elaborate for a small subdivision's administrative space. The desk alone probably cost $10,000. I'll see you in court, I said, standing up. I look forward to it, Cynthia replied, her smile returning full force. Though I should mention, our HOA legal fund is quite robust. We can afford to litigate for as long as necessary. Can you? I left without responding, my hands shaking with anger. Brenda watched me go with an expression of smug satisfaction, and I barely resisted the urge to say something that would probably result in another fine for threatening language. Back home, I called Samuel Chen and told him everything. He agreed to take my case and said he'd start by filing a formal complaint with the HOA board and preparing a response to the fines. He also recommended I start attending the monthly HOA board meetings, which were open to all residents. Know your enemy, Samuel said. See how they operate, who's on the board, what they're focused on. It'll help our case, and you might find allies among other homeowners who are fed up with this nonsense. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening. I marked it on my calendar and spent the weekend documenting everything: photos of my flag with measurements, copies of all notices and fines, screenshots of my social media posts and the news coverage, even photos of other houses in the neighborhood that had various decorations and flags that seemed to violate the same rules I was being cited for. My neighbor Frank came over on Sunday afternoon with a 6-pack of beer and some advice. We sat on my back patio, away from prying eyes, and he told me more about Cynthia Carmichael's reign of terror. It started small, Frank explained, working on his second beer. Little fines here and there, strict enforcement of rules that previous boards had been relaxed about. But over the past year, it's gotten crazy. The Henderson situation I mentioned was just the beginning. She fined Margaret Cho $3,000 for planting roses that were supposedly the wrong color. Told the Pattersons their basketball hoop was a safety hazard and had to be removed within 48 hours or face daily fines. Nobody knows where all this money is going. HOA fees keep going up, but we're not seeing improvements to common areas or amenities. Has anyone looked into the finances? Frank laughed. Tried to. Cynthia claims all financial records are confidential board business. She releases a quarterly summary that's basically useless, just broad categories with dollar amounts and no details. When someone requested to review the actual books at a board meeting last year, she had them escorted out by a security guard for disruptive behavior. That can't be legal. Probably not, but nobody wants to hire a lawyer to fight it. Most folks just pay the fines and keep their heads down. The ones who can't afford it end up selling and moving away, like the Hendersons. I thought about this while finishing my beer. Something was definitely rotten in the Riverside Meadows HOA, and it went way beyond overzealous rule enforcement. Tuesday evening arrived, and I drove to the community center where the board meetings were held. The center was a modest building near the subdivision's small park, with a main room that could hold maybe 75 people. When I arrived at 6:50, only about a dozen residents were scattered among the folding chairs facing a long table where the board members would sit. Frank was there, sitting in the back row. He waved me over, and I took a seat next to him. An older woman I didn't recognize sat in front of us, and a young couple I'd seen around the neighborhood occupied the front row with a baby in a carrier. At exactly 7 o'clock, Cynthia Carmichael entered through a side door, followed by 4 other board members. They took their seats at the table with the self-importance of Supreme Court justices. Cynthia sat in the center, with 2 members on each side. "Good evening, everyone," Cynthia said, her voice amplified by a microphone that really wasn't necessary in such a small room. "I call this meeting of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association Board to order. Let's begin with roll call." The board secretary, a nervous-looking man in his 50s named Douglas Palmer, called out each board member's name. Besides Cynthia and Douglas, there was Vanessa Wright, a woman in her 30s who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, Martin Cooper, who appeared to be in his 60s and seemed barely awake, and Patricia Novak, another middle-aged woman who watched Cynthia with an expression that bordered on worship. The meeting proceeded with mind-numbing discussions of landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules, and a lengthy debate about whether the community entrance signs needed repainting. Every topic was dominated by Cynthia, who spoke with authority on everything from which brand of mulch to purchase to the exact shade of beige for repainting the signs. The other board members either agreed immediately or stayed silent. After 45 minutes of this, Cynthia finally opened the floor for resident comments. "We allow up to 3 minutes per resident for questions or concerns. Please keep your comments respectful and on topic." The young couple in the front row stood up. The husband, who introduced himself as Marcus Thompson, held up his phone showing a picture of their house. "We received a violation notice last week for having a wreath on our front door. The notice said decorative items require approval. But our next-door neighbors have a wreath on their door, and the house 2 doors down has a decorative flag hanging by their entrance. Why are we being singled out?" Cynthia's expression remained pleasant, but I saw something cold flash in her eyes. "Mr. Thompson, your wreath is oversized and blocks more than 50% of your door's glass panel, which violates our safety requirements for emergency access. The other wreaths you're referring to meet dimensional standards. If you'd like to purchase an appropriately sized wreath, I'm sure we can approve it." The violation notice didn't say anything about size or safety. It just said decorations require approval. "I'm explaining the rationale now. Do you have any other questions?" Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but his wife pulled him back down into his seat. I could see the frustration on their faces, the same helpless anger I'd felt in Cynthia's office. The older woman in front of Frank stood up next. "My name is Dorothy Brennan, and I've lived here for 12 years. I want to know why our HOA fees have increased 3 times in the past 2 years, but I haven't seen any improvements to justify the increases. Our playground equipment is rusted, the community pool needs repairs, and the landscaping at the entrance looks worse than it did 5 years ago. Where is our money going?" Cynthia's smile tightened. "Mrs. Brennan, as I've explained at previous meetings, the fee increases are necessary to cover rising operational costs, insurance, legal expenses, and reserve fund contributions. All expenditures are reviewed and approved by this board in accordance with our fiduciary responsibilities. Can we see the detailed budget? The quarterly summaries don't provide enough information. Financial records are confidential board business. Mrs. Brennan, we provide summaries that comply with Arizona HOA statutes. If you have specific questions about line items in those summaries, you can submit them in writing, and we'll respond appropriately." I've submitted written questions 3 times. I never received a response. I have no record of receiving questions from you, Mrs. Brennan. Perhaps they were lost in the mail. Please submit them again, and I'll ensure they're addressed. Dorothy sat down, shaking her head in defeat. I could see this was a pattern: residents asking reasonable questions, Cynthia providing non-answers, and everyone giving up because fighting was too exhausting. I stood up. Every eye in the room turned to me, including Cynthia's. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw recognition and something else, anticipation, maybe, like a cat spotting a mouse. "My name is Connor Caldwell. I've been fined over $1,000 in the past 2 weeks, starting with a fine for displaying an American flag. Federal law protects my right to display that flag, and the other fines I've received appear to be retaliation for challenging the original violation. I'd like to know what justification this board has for violating federal law and engaging in targeted harassment." The room went silent. I could feel Frank's approval radiating from the seat next to mine. The other residents were watching Cynthia, waiting to see how she'd respond. Cynthia took her time, letting the silence stretch out. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured and calm. Mr. Caldwell, you've received multiple violation notices for legitimate infractions of our community guidelines. These are not retaliatory. They're the result of a comprehensive inspection of your property that revealed numerous violations. As for the flag, I've already explained that reasonable restrictions apply under federal law. The size and placement of your flag exceed our approved standards. That's not a violation of federal law. It's enforcement of reasonable community standards. Other houses in this neighborhood have flags the same size as mine. Some have decorative flags that are even larger. Why am I being singled out? If you're aware of other violations, please submit the addresses to our office and we'll investigate. This meeting isn't the appropriate forum for debating individual enforcement actions. Your 3 minutes are up, Mr. Caldwell. Please, sit down. I'm not done. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell, or I'll have you removed for disruptive behavior. I remained standing for a few more seconds, just long enough to make my point, then sat down. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I'd been in a fight. Frank patted my shoulder in silent support. The meeting wrapped up shortly after that. Cynthia announced that the next meeting would be in 4 weeks, and the board members filed out through the same side door they'd entered. Most of the residents left immediately, but Dorothy Brennan and the Thompsons came over to talk to Frank and me. "That took guts," Dorothy said, shaking my hand. "Most people don't challenge her directly." "A lot of good it did," I replied. "More than you think. You got under her skin. Did you see how tight her jaw got when you mentioned federal law? She's used to people backing down." Marcus Thompson nodded. "We got our fine notice the day after the local news ran a story about HOA abuse. I think she's targeting people who might cause trouble. Your flag story got a lot of attention." "So what do we do?" his wife Jennifer asked. "We can't all afford lawyers, and these fines are getting out of control." "We document everything," I said. "Every fine, every interaction, every violation notice, and we start asking questions about where the money is going. Dorothy's right, something doesn't add up with the finances." We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to stay in touch. As I walked to my car, I noticed Cynthia's silver Mercedes still parked near the community center entrance. She was sitting inside talking on her phone, and when she saw me looking, she stared right back without blinking. I felt that chill again, the same feeling I'd had in her office. Whatever was going on with Cynthia Carmichael and this HOA, it was bigger than petty power games. The next morning, I received another violation notice. This one cited me for unauthorized vehicle parking, because my truck was parked in my own driveway at an angle that supposedly blocked the sidewalk by 3 inches. The fine was $300. I took photos proving my truck was completely within my property lines and sent them to Samuel Chen along with all the other documentation. Samuel called me that afternoon. "Connor, this is egregious harassment. I'm drafting a formal legal response to all the fines and preparing to file a lawsuit if they don't back down. But I've also been doing some research on this Riverside Meadows HOA, and I think you should know they've been involved in multiple lawsuits over the past 3 years. Small claims cases mostly from residents who got tired of the fines. The HOA won most of them because they have expensive lawyers and people usually give up. But here's what's interesting. The HOA's legal expenses over the past 3 years total over $300,000, according to the summary reports I found online. That's insane for a subdivision of your size. $300,000 for what? That's the question. Either they're litigating way more cases than the public record shows, or something else is going on. I've got a colleague who specializes in HOA financial investigations. With your permission, I'd like to bring her in to take a look at the public records. Do it, whatever it costs. It might not cost anything. If there's financial misconduct happening, she might take it on contingency. There are some serious legal remedies available when HOA boards misappropriate funds. I hung up feeling like maybe finally we were getting somewhere. That evening, Frank came over again, this time with Dorothy, Marcus, and Jennifer. We sat around my kitchen table and compiled a list of everyone we knew who'd been fined or harassed by the HOA. The list grew to 23 names by the time we finished. "We need to organize," Dorothy said. "Get all these people together, pool our resources, figure out how much money we're talking about in total. If Cynthia's doing something illegal with HOA funds, we need evidence." Over the next 2 weeks, we held 3 meetings at Frank's house, which was larger than mine. By the third meeting, we had 37 residents attending. The stories were all similar: excessive fines for minor or non-existent violations, requests for financial information being denied or ignored, attempts to question the board being shut down. The total amount of fines assessed just among our group over the past year exceeded $60,000. Samuel's colleague, a sharp-minded attorney named Rebecca Foster, joined us at the third meeting. She'd spent the previous week digging through every public record she could find on the Riverside Meadows HOA. "I've found some significant red flags," Rebecca told the group. She had her laptop open, showing a spreadsheet that made my eyes hurt. "Your HOA collects approximately $200,000 per year in regular assessments from the 450 homes in this subdivision. Special assessments and fines add maybe another $50,000. That's $250,000 in revenue annually. According to the quarterly summaries, operational expenses are running about $220,000 per year, leaving minimal reserve funding. That's problem number 1. Your reserves should be much healthier for a community this size." "Where's the money going?" someone asked. "That's problem number 2. The expense categories are extremely vague. Administrative costs are listed at $60,000 annually. Legal expenses are at $75,000 per year. Management fees are $40,000. Those numbers are way out of proportion for a subdivision this size. A typical HOA your size should spend maybe $20,000 on admin, $30,000 max on legal if they're dealing with significant issues, and management fees should be around $20,000 to $25,000. The room erupted in angry muttering. Dorothy raised her hand. "So what does that mean? Is she stealing from us?" "I can't prove that without seeing the actual books," Rebecca said, "but the numbers strongly suggest either severe mismanagement or intentional diversion of funds. There's also the question of these violation fines. Arizona law requires HOA fines to be reasonable and proportionate. $200 to $300 for minor aesthetic violations is excessive. If she's assessing fines at that level systematically, and the money isn't being used for community benefit, that's another problem." "How do we force them to open the books?" I asked. Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 33-1805, gives HOA members the right to inspect financial records, including bank statements, invoices, and receipts. They can charge a reasonable copying fee, but they can't deny access. If they refuse, we can get a court order compelling production of the records. Given what I'm seeing, I'd recommend we skip the polite request and go straight to court. We file a petition for inspection of records and ask for an emergency injunction preventing the board from transferring or disposing of any funds pending review." "Won't that tip them off that we're investigating?" Marcus asked. Rebecca smiled. "Oh, it absolutely will. But if there's misconduct happening, we want to freeze everything before they can hide evidence. Once we have the records, we'll know exactly what we're dealing with." The group voted unanimously to proceed. Rebecca said she'd file the petition first thing Monday morning. That gave us 3 days to prepare for whatever response Cynthia Carmichael would mount. Those 3 days felt like 3 years. I barely slept, constantly checking my phone for new violation notices or other harassment from the HOA. Frank and I drove around the neighborhood documenting other houses that had flags, decorations, and other features similar to the violations we'd been cited for. We found 17 houses with American flags comparable to mine, 11 with decorative wreaths larger than the Thompsons, and countless minor issues like grass slightly too tall or mailboxes with small cosmetic damage. None of those homes had received violation notices. Monday morning arrived and Rebecca filed the petition in Maricopa County Superior Court. By Monday afternoon, the news had somehow reached Cynthia. I know this because I received a phone call from Brenda at exactly 3:47 p.m. "Mr. Caldwell, the board has decided to offer you a settlement. If you withdraw from this frivolous legal action, we'll waive all your outstanding fines and issue a written approval for your current flag. This is a one-time offer, valid for 24 hours. "I'm not interested in a settlement, Brenda. I want a full audit of the HOA's finances and accountability for the harassment campaign you've been running against multiple homeowners." "That's unfortunate, Mr. Caldwell. Mrs. Carmichael tried to be reasonable. You'll regret this decision." She hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Rebecca and told her about the settlement offer. That's interesting, Rebecca said. They're scared. People who have nothing to hide don't offer to make problems go away that quickly. I'd say we're on the right track. The hearing on our petition was scheduled for the following Tuesday, giving the HOA time to respond. Their response came Thursday afternoon, a 20-page document filed by a law firm from Scottsdale that probably charged $1,000 an hour. The filing argued that the financial records were privileged board business, that allowing access would violate privacy rights, and that our petition was part of a coordinated harassment campaign against the HOA board. It's all garbage, Samuel told me after reviewing the response. Standard stalling tactics. The judge will see right through it. Arizona law is very clear on this. Members have a right to inspect records. The weekend passed slowly. On Sunday evening, I was sitting on my back patio when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Washington, D.C. area code. Mr. Caldwell? The voice was male, professional, and carried an authority that made me sit up straighter. My name is Agent Derek Wilson. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit. I understand you filed a legal action to inspect the financial records of your homeowners association. My brain stuttered. I'm sorry, did you say FBI? Yes, sir. I know this is unexpected. I'd like to meet with you in person to discuss your HOA and some concerns we have regarding its operations. Would you be available tomorrow morning? Yes? What's this about? I'd prefer to discuss it in person. How about 9 a.m. at the Starbucks on Val Vista and Baseline? I'll be wearing a blue suit and a red tie. Okay, 9 a.m. I'll be there. Agent Wilson hung up, and I stared at my phone like it might explain what the hell was happening. The FBI? What did the FBI have to do with HOA fines and mismanaged community funds? I called Samuel immediately, but it went to voicemail. I tried Rebecca. Same thing. It was Sunday night. They probably had lives outside of dealing with my HOA drama. I left urgent messages for both of them, asking them to call me as soon as possible. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept spinning through possibilities, each more wild than the last. Had Cynthia done something that caught federal attention? Was this about fraud? Money laundering? Or was this some kind of intimidation tactic, though, that seemed paranoid even for my current state of mind? At 8:30 Monday morning, I was sitting in my truck in the Starbucks parking lot, watching people come and go. At 8:55, a black sedan pulled in and parked near the entrance. A man in his 40s stepped out wearing exactly what he'd described: blue suit, red tie. He was tall, fit, with close-cropped hair and the kind of bearing that screamed federal law enforcement. I got out of my truck and walked over. Agent Wilson, he extended his hand. Mr. Caldwell, thanks for meeting me. Let's grab a table inside. We ordered coffee and found a table in the back corner, away from the morning rush of people getting their caffeine fixes before work. Agent Wilson pulled out a leather portfolio and set it on the table. E.T. I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Caldwell. The FBI has been investigating Cynthia Carmichael for the past 14 months. When your attorney filed the petition to access HOA records, it triggered an alert in our monitoring system. We need to coordinate with your legal action to ensure you don't inadvertently interfere with our investigation. I felt like I'd been punched. You've been investigating her? For what? Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. We believe Mrs. Carmichael has been systematically embezzling funds from the Riverside Meadows HOA and potentially from other sources. The amount we're looking at is approximately $1.2 million over the past 4 years. I couldn't speak. $1.2 million from our small subdivision HOA? Agent Wilson continued. Cynthia Carmichael is president of 3 different HOAs in the Phoenix metropolitan area. She's also a paid consultant for 5 others. We believe she's been using her access to HOA accounts to skim funds through false vendor payments, inflated legal expenses, and direct transfers to accounts she controls. The money has been moving through a network of shell companies and eventually into offshore accounts. How did you even find out about this? We didn't start with your HOA. We've been investigating a series of mortgage fraud cases in the Phoenix area. During that investigation, we noticed suspicious patterns in HOA assessment liens. Some homeowners were losing their properties over unpaid HOA debts that seemed excessive or fraudulent. When we dug deeper, we found connections between several HOA boards and the same few individuals, including Mrs. Carmichael. Once we started looking at HOA financial patterns, the scope of the fraud became apparent. So what does this mean for our petition to access records? We need you to proceed with it. We've been building our case through bank records, subpoenaed documents, and witness interviews. But we don't have comprehensive access to the HOA's internal records. If you get a court order granting inspection rights, you'll be able to access documents we haven't seen yet. We need you to be our eyes and ears during that process. You want me to work with the FBI? Agent Wilson smiled slightly. More like we want to work with you. You and your neighbors have every right to inspect those records. We're just asking that you share what you find with us. In exchange, we can offer some protection if Mrs. Carmichael attempts to escalate her harassment and will ensure that any criminal prosecution doesn't prevent you from recovering misappropriated funds through civil action. My head was spinning. This morning I'd woken up worried about HOA fines, and now I was being recruited to help with a federal fraud investigation. I need to talk to my lawyers. Of course, here's my card. Have them call me. But Mr. Caldwell, I need to emphasize, do not discuss this with anyone except your attorneys. If Mrs. Carmichael suspects we're actively investigating, she might destroy evidence or flee. We're very close to having enough for an indictment. Your petition has probably already spooked her. We need to move quickly. When do you think you'll arrest her? If everything goes as planned, within the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're coordinating with the IRS and the Arizona Attorney General's office. This is going to be a major case when it breaks, but we need those HOA records to fill in the final gaps. We talked for another 20 minutes. Agent Wilson explained some of the mechanics of how Cynthia had allegedly been running her scheme, creating fake companies with names similar to legitimate vendors, submitting invoices for services never rendered, approving payments to these fake companies, and then transferring the money through several accounts before it disappeared offshore. The legal expenses our HOA had been paying weren't entirely fake, but they were enormously inflated, with Cynthia getting kickbacks from the law firm she'd hired. After Agent Wilson left, I sat in my truck for 15 minutes trying to process everything. When I finally felt steady enough to drive, I went home and called Samuel Chen. He called me back within 10 minutes. "Samuel, you're not going to believe this," I said, and told him everything. There was a long silence after I finished. Then Samuel laughed, a genuine sound of amazement. "Connor, in 15 years of practicing law, I've never had a case go from HOA fines to federal fraud investigation. This is insane." "What do we do?" "I call Agent Wilson, we coordinate our strategy, and we make sure the petition hearing goes smoothly. This changes everything. We're not just fighting for financial records anymore, we're helping build a criminal case. I'll call Rebecca and bring her up to speed. In the meantime, you need to be very careful. If Cynthia suspects something, she might do something desperate." "Like what?" "I don't know, but people facing prison time don't always think rationally. Watch your back, vary your routine, and document anything unusual. I'm not trying to scare you, but we're in different territory now." I spent the rest of that day in a daze, going through the motions of my work-from-home job while my mind churned through everything I'd learned. That evening, Frank came over, and I had to decide whether to tell him what was happening. Agent Wilson had said not to discuss it with anyone except my attorneys, but Frank had been with me from the beginning. He deserved to know. "Frank, I need to tell you something, and you need to keep it absolutely confidential." His expression became serious. "What's going on?" I told him about Agent Wilson and the investigation. Frank's eyes got wider with every sentence. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "I knew something was wrong with her, but federal fraud. $1.2 million. Holy hell, Connor. We can't tell anyone, not even the others in our group. The FBI needs to keep this quiet until they're ready to make arrests." "When's the hearing for the records?" "Tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'm coming with you. You shouldn't face this alone." The next morning, I met Samuel and Rebecca at the courthouse. They'd spoken with Agent Wilson and had a plan. Rebecca would argue the petition, focusing on the statutory right to inspect records and the evidence of financial irregularities. If the judge granted our petition, We'd have access to the HOA's internal financial documents within days. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with maybe 30 seats for observers. Cynthia Carmichael was there with 2 attorneys from the Scottsdale firm that had filed the HOA's response. She wore a dark gray suit and had her hair pulled back in that same severe style. When she saw me walk in, her expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes, calculation, maybe, or concern. The hearing began at 2 p.m. sharp. Judge Catherine Morrison presided, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd clearly read both our petition and the HOA's response because she got right to the point. Counsel for the petitioners, you're seeking to inspect the HOA's financial records based on Arizona Revised Statute Section 33, 1805. Counsel for the HOA argues these records are privileged and that inspection would violate privacy. Let's start with you, Ms. Foster. Why should I grant this petition? Rebecca stood and delivered a clear, concise argument. She cited the statute, explained that Arizona law gave HOA members broad rights to inspect financial records, and presented evidence of the suspicious expense patterns we'd discovered. She also noted that the HOA's resistance to transparency was itself a red flag. Your Honor, the petitioners aren't asking for anything unreasonable. They're asking to see how their money is being spent. The law explicitly grants them this right. The HOA's arguments about privilege and privacy are without merit. Financial records of a nonprofit organization funded by member assessments are not private. They're accountable to the membership. The HOA's attorney stood up next, a man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive watch. Your Honor, the board has fiduciary responsibilities that include maintaining confidentiality of sensitive business information. Opening the books to inspection by disgruntled homeowners who are pursuing a harassment campaign against the board would compromise the HOA's ability to function effectively. We've provided quarterly financial summaries that comply with statutory requirements. That should be sufficient. Judge Morrison looked skeptical. Counselor, the statute doesn't say members get access to summaries. It says they get access to records. Unless you can point me to a specific exemption that applies here, I'm inclined to grant the petition. The HOA's attorney tried several more arguments, but Judge Morrison shut each one down. After 30 minutes of back and forth, she made her ruling. I'm granting the petition. The HOA will provide petitioners' counsel with access to all financial records, including bank statements, invoices, receipts, contracts, and account ledgers for the past 5 years within 7 business days. The HOA may be present during inspection and may redact personal information like Social Security numbers, but they may not withhold documents based on claims of privilege or privacy. Any disputes about specific documents will be brought back to this court for resolution. That's my order. The gavel came down, and I felt a surge of triumph. We'd won. Cynthia stood up immediately and walked out of the courtroom without a word, her attorneys hurrying after her. Frank, who'd been sitting in the observer section, came over with a huge grin. We got her, he said quietly. We actually got her. Samuel, Rebecca, and I went to a coffee shop nearby to discuss next steps. Rebecca would coordinate with Agent Wilson to ensure the FBI was ready when we accessed the records. Samuel would prepare the logistics for the inspection and bring in a forensic accountant to help review the documents. This is going to move fast now, Rebecca said. Cynthia knows she's cornered. The FBI thinks she might try to destroy evidence or flee. We need to be ready for anything. She was right. The next 48 hours were chaotic. Word somehow leaked that we'd won the court order, and the news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from other homeowners asking what was happening. I had to be careful what I said, sticking to vague statements about financial accountability and transparency. On Thursday morning, Rebecca and a forensic accountant named Michael Torres went to the HOA office to begin the document inspection. Agent Wilson had arranged for FBI agents to be on standby nearby in case Cynthia tried anything. I wasn't allowed to attend the inspection. Rebecca said it was better to keep the number of people involved small, but she promised to update me regularly. The first update came at noon. Connor, this is worse than we thought. Michael has already found clear evidence of fraudulent invoicing. There are payments to companies that don't exist, inflated legal bills with kickback schemes, and direct transfers to accounts we can't identify. We're talking hundreds of thousands just in the records we've reviewed so far. I've already called Agent Wilson. He's getting warrants prepared. The second update came at 4 p.m. Cynthia showed up an hour ago with her attorneys. She tried to stop the inspection, claiming we were exceeding the scope of the court order. Her lawyers are arguing every document. Michael thinks she's stalling to buy time for something. The FBI agents are in the parking lot now, just in case. I couldn't sit still. I paced my house, checked my phone every 30 seconds, and drove Frank crazy with text updates. By 7 p.m., Rebecca called again. "We're done for today. We've copied about 60% of the records. Michael says he has more than enough to confirm major fraud. Agent Wilson wants to meet with all of us tomorrow morning. I think things are about to happen very quickly." That night, I barely slept again. Every sound made me jump. I kept thinking about Cynthia's cold eyes and calculated demeanor. What would someone like that do when they knew the walls were closing in? I got my answer at 5:47 a.m. when my phone rang. It was Agent Wilson. "Mr. Caldwell, I need you to stay home and away from the HOA office today. We're executing search warrants on the HOA office, Cynthia Carmichael's home, and several other locations within the next hour. There will be a significant law enforcement presence in your neighborhood. Don't be alarmed, and don't discuss this with anyone yet. I'll call you when it's safe to talk." "You're arresting her?" "If we find what we expect to find, yes. Stay safe, Connor." He hung up. I stood in my kitchen in the pre-dawn darkness, my heart pounding. It was really happening. After weeks of fighting over a flag and dealing with petty fines, the whole rotten structure was coming down. I made coffee and turned on the local news, but there was nothing yet. At 6:30 a.m., I heard helicopters. I looked out my window and saw 3 news helicopters circling over a section of the neighborhood about a mile away, right where Cynthia Carmichael lived. My phone started buzzing with texts from Frank and others asking if I knew what was happening. I texted back, "Don't know details. Stay tuned to news. We'll update when I can." At 7:15 a.m., the news broke. Every local station was carrying it. "FBI raids HOA office in Gilbert," scrolled across the bottom of the screen while a reporter stood outside the Riverside Meadows HOA office building. Behind her, I could see FBI agents in windbreakers carrying boxes out of the building. "Federal agents are executing search warrants this morning at multiple locations connected to the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association," the reporter said. "Sources tell us this is part of a major fraud investigation involving HOA President Cynthia Carmichael. We're also getting reports of simultaneous raids at her home and at offices in Scottsdale and Tempe. Details are still emerging, but this appears to be a significant white-collar crime investigation." My phone exploded with calls and texts. I ignored them all, glued to the TV. The news coverage continued for the next 2 hours, with reporters gradually piecing together more information. They mentioned embezzlement, fraud, money laundering. They showed footage of Cynthia being led out of her house in handcuffs, her face blank, refusing to answer reporters' questions. At 9:30 a.m., Samuel called. "Connor, have you seen the news?" "I've been watching since it started." "Agent Wilson is holding a press conference at 11. He asked if you'd be willing to appear with him and other affected homeowners. You don't have to, but it might help the public understand the human impact of this fraud." I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. "I'll do it." The press conference was held at the FBI's Phoenix field office. Agent Wilson stood at a podium with the FBI seal behind him, flanked by other federal agents and representatives from the Arizona Attorney General's office. Samuel, Rebecca, Frank, Dorothy, and I stood off to the side with about a dozen other homeowners from various communities. Agent Wilson spoke first, laying out the basics of the investigation. "Today, the FBI arrested Cynthia Carmichael, age 48, of Gilbert, Arizona, on federal charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. We allege that Mrs. Carmichael systematically embezzled approximately $1.8 million from multiple homeowners associations over a 4-year period." The number had gone up from $1.2 million. My stomach dropped. Mrs. Carmichael held positions of authority in several HOAs across the Phoenix metropolitan area. She used that authority to approve fraudulent payments to shell companies she controlled, inflate service contracts and legal expenses, and divert HOA funds for personal use. She then laundered the money through a complex network of accounts and offshore entities. This investigation involved coordination between the FBI, IRS, Arizona Attorney General's Office, and local law enforcement. We expect additional arrests in the coming days as we pursue other individuals who may have assisted in this scheme. Agent Wilson then invited me to speak. I stepped up to the microphone, my hands shaking slightly. Every major news outlet in Phoenix had cameras pointed at me. My name is Connor Caldwell. I'm a homeowner in the Riverside Meadows subdivision in Gilbert. 2 months ago, I received a violation notice from my HOA for displaying an American flag that belonged to my grandfather, a Marine Corps veteran. I was fined repeatedly for that flag and other minor issues. When I started asking questions about where our HOA fees were going, I was met with stonewalling and threats. I never imagined that standing up for my right to fly my grandfather's flag would lead to uncovering federal crimes. But that's what happened, and I want every homeowner in Arizona to know if your HOA seems more interested in collecting fines than maintaining your community, if financial information is being withheld, if board members are resistant to transparency, speak up. Ask questions. Hold them accountable. What happened in my neighborhood could be happening in yours. The press conference continued for another 30 minutes with other homeowners sharing their experiences. Dorothy talked about being fined thousands of dollars for minor violations. Marcus and Jennifer described watching their savings drain to pay excessive HOA penalties. Frank, who'd lived in Riverside Meadows longer than anyone, talked about watching the community deteriorate while fees increased and a dictatorial board silenced dissent. After the press conference, reporters tried to ask me additional questions, but Samuel and Rebecca guided me away. We went back to Samuel's office, where Agent Wilson joined us for a debriefing. "The arraignment is scheduled for tomorrow," Agent Wilson said. "Mrs. Carmichael's attorney will likely request bail, but we're going to argue she's a flight risk given the offshore accounts and the severity of the charges. Even if she makes bail, her assets are frozen. She's not going anywhere." "What happens to the HOA now?" I asked. "That's a good question. The Attorney General's office will work with your community to establish an interim board and begin the process of recovering misappropriated funds. There will be a full accounting of what was stolen and where it went. Some of the money may be recoverable, but realistically, you'll probably only get back a fraction. The priority is making sure the HOA can function and that homeowners aren't hit with special assessments to cover the shortfall." Over the following weeks, the full scope of Cynthia Carmichael's crimes became public. She'd embezzled from 3 different HOAs where she served as president and had skimmed money from 5 others where she worked as a paid consultant. The scheme had been running for 6 years, not 4. The total amount stolen exceeded $2.3 million. She'd used the money to fund a lavish lifestyle, luxury cars, expensive vacations, a second home in California, all while telling homeowners that fee increases were necessary due to rising costs. Her accomplices included Brenda, the HOA office manager, who had helped create fraudulent documents and had received over $100,000 in kickbacks. 2 of the board members, Patricia Novak and Douglas Palmer, had also been aware of the fraud and had been compensated for their silence. All 3 were arrested and charged. The law firm from Scottsdale that had billed outrageous legal fees was investigated as well. 2 partners at the firm were ultimately charged with conspiracy and wire fraud for their role in the scheme. They'd been billing the HOA for services never rendered and splitting the money with Cynthia. As for me and my flag, all the violation notices and fines were voided by the court. The interim board that took over the HOA issued a formal apology to everyone who'd been targeted and announced that enforcement policies would be completely overhauled. My flag still flies next to my garage, exactly where I put it when I moved in. The criminal trial took place 8 months later. I attended several days of testimony, watching Cynthia Carmichael sit at the defense table, looking smaller and older than she had in her HOA office. The evidence against her was overwhelming: documents, bank records, witness testimony, emails explicitly discussing the fraud. Her attorney tried to argue that she'd been under financial stress and had made mistakes, but it was clear this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sophisticated, long-running criminal operation. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Cynthia Carmichael was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution. Brenda got 5 years. Patricia Novak and Douglas Palmer each got 3 years and substantial fines. The lawyers from Scottsdale were disbarred and sentenced to prison terms as well. The recovery process for the HOA was long and complicated. A forensic accounting firm spent months untangling the finances. They managed to trace and recover about $800,000 from various accounts Cynthia had used. It wasn't nearly enough to cover what had been stolen, but it helped. The community had to approve a modest special assessment to rebuild the reserve fund, but it was manageable, nothing like what would have been necessary if we hadn't caught the fraud when we did. Through all of this, our neighborhood group stayed connected. What had started as a handful of frustrated homeowners fighting excessive fines became a lasting community coalition. We established new HOA bylaws that required financial transparency, regular audits, and real accountability for board members. Frank ran for the board and won easily, becoming the new president. Dorothy became treasurer, insisting on reviewing every penny that came in and went out. The whole experience changed how I looked at community governance. HOAs exist to maintain property values and provide services, but when they operate without oversight, when board members face no real accountability, when financial records are treated as state secrets, corruption can flourish. It doesn't take a criminal mastermind, just someone with access, authority, and the willingness to abuse both. My legal bills ended up totaling about $15,000, even with Samuel and Rebecca giving me significant discounts. But the lawsuit we filed against Cynthia Carmichael, the HOA, and the Scottsdale law firm resulted in a settlement that covered my costs and provided compensation for the harassment I'd endured. More importantly, it established legal precedents that other Arizona homeowners could use to challenge HOA abuses. The flag that started everything still flies outside my house. I think about my grandfather whenever I see it, and I think about what he would have said about all this. He was a Marine who believed in fighting for what was right, standing up to bullies, and never backing down from an unjust fight. I'd like to think he would have been proud. On quiet evenings, I sometimes sit on my patio with Frank, sharing a beer and talking about the absolute insanity of those months when a simple flag violation turned into a federal fraud investigation. We laugh about it now, but it was terrifying while it was happening. The moment when Agent Wilson first called me, the press conference, watching federal agents raid the HOA office, seeing Cynthia led away in handcuffs, those images are burned into my memory. The story became something of a sensation in HOA reform circles. I was invited to speak at several events about HOA accountability and transparency. News outlets from across the country picked it up as an example of what can go wrong when community organizations operate without proper oversight. Arizona eventually passed new legislation strengthening homeowner rights and requiring more rigorous financial reporting from HOAs. Jennifer Thompson, the young mother who'd been fined for a wreath, told me months later that she'd been ready to move away from Riverside Meadows before the investigation broke. She couldn't handle the stress of constant violations and fines while trying to raise her infant daughter. But after the cleanup, after the new board took over and the culture changed, she decided to stay. Her house has multiple wreaths now, all different sizes, and nobody's said a word about it. That's maybe the best outcome of all this. A community that was fractured, frightened, and demoralized by an abusive board is now functioning the way an HOA should. We have neighborhood events, actual maintenance of common areas, reasonable enforcement of sensible rules, and transparency in finances. People aren't afraid to speak up at board meetings. When someone has a legitimate concern, it's addressed rather than punished. I still live in the same house on Sycamore Drive. I've made real friends here, people bonded by shared adversity and the satisfaction of bringing down a corrupt system. My property value has actually increased since the scandal broke, which seems counterintuitive until you realize that prospective buyers appreciate knowing the HOA is now run properly. Sometimes I drive past the old HOA office building. There's a new management company running things now, professional and competent. The days of Brenda glaring at homeowners from behind her desk are long gone. The office itself has been renovated, painted in brighter colors, made more welcoming. It's like they were trying to erase the dark energy that Cynthia Carmichael had created there. The Scottsdale law firm that participated in the fraud scheme went bankrupt and dissolved. The two partners who were convicted lost everything: their licenses, their freedom, their reputations. I can't say I felt sorry for them. They'd knowingly participated in stealing from regular people to enrich themselves. That kind of betrayal of professional ethics deserves every consequence it gets. Agent Wilson and I stayed in occasional contact after the trial. He told me that the Carmichael case led to several other investigations of HOA fraud in Arizona and neighboring states. Apparently, it's more common than most people realize. Small-time operators who see HOA accounts as personal piggy banks and assume homeowners will never look closely enough to notice. The publicity from our case made some of those other criminals nervous, and several turned themselves in or were caught when homeowners started asking harder questions. A year after Cynthia's sentencing, I received a letter from her attorney. She wanted to apologize and asked if I would visit her in prison. I declined. Maybe that makes me petty, but I wasn't interested in providing her with closure or forgiveness. She'd made my life hell over a flag, stolen millions of dollars from hard-working families, and shown zero remorse until she was facing serious prison time. Some things don't warrant forgiveness. Frank and I installed a small memorial plaque in the community park honoring my grandfather and other veterans from our neighborhood. The new HOA board approved it unanimously and even helped fund it. The plaque sits next to a properly sized American flag that flies 24/7, illuminated at night according to flag code. It's become a gathering spot for community events, a symbol of what we fought for and what we reclaimed. Looking back, I'm amazed at how a simple violation notice escalated into everything that followed. If I'd just taken down the flag like Cynthia demanded, none of this would have happened. She'd still be stealing, homeowners would still be suffering under her tyrannical rule, and eventually the financial house of cards would have collapsed in an even more catastrophic way. By standing up for something that mattered to me personally, my grandfather's flag, and what it represented, I accidentally triggered a chain of events that brought down a criminal enterprise. There's a lesson in that, I think. Small acts of resistance matter. Questioning authority matters. Demanding transparency and accountability matters. If every homeowner who received an unjust fine had just paid it and moved on, Cynthia Carmichael might still be in her fancy office, driving her luxury car and stealing from families trying to build their lives in what they thought was a safe, well-managed community. The other day, a new family moved in down the street. I introduced myself and welcomed them to the neighborhood. The husband mentioned that they'd been nervous about buying a house in an HOA after hearing horror stories, but the reforms we'd implemented and the new board's reputation made them comfortable with the decision. I told him the short version of what had happened, about the flag and the investigation and the federal raid. His eyes got wide. "You're that guy? The flag guy who took down the HOA president?" I laughed. I guess that's one way to describe it, but it wasn't just me. It was a whole community of people who were fed up and decided to fight back. That's the real story. He asked if the neighborhood was really as good as it seemed now. I assured him it was. We've got our issues like any community, minor disputes over parking and noise and all the usual neighborhood friction. But we handle them like adults, with conversation and compromise, not arbitrary fines and authoritarian enforcement. The HOA serves the homeowners now, not the other way around. As I write this, sitting on my patio with my grandfather's flag visible through the sliding glass door, I feel a sense of satisfaction that's rare in life. Justice was served. Wrongs were righted. A corrupt system was dismantled and rebuilt properly. And all because I refused to take down a flag that meant something to me. My grandfather used to say that freedom isn't free, someone always pays the price. I never really understood what he meant until I found myself in a legal battle with an HOA, then accidentally helping the FBI investigate federal crimes. The price of standing up for what's right can be high stress, money, time, risk. But the cost of not standing up is higher. It's the slow erosion of rights, the normalization of abuse, the triumph of petty tyrants who count on good people staying silent. I paid the price, and I'd do it again. Because that flag still flies, Cynthia Carmichael is in prison where she belongs, and my neighborhood is a better place. Sometimes the fight chooses you, and all you can do is fight it as well as you can. I got lucky I had good lawyers, supportive neighbors, and the FBI already investigating the person I was fighting. But even without that luck, I like to think I would have kept fighting. Some things are worth the cost. The flag moves in the evening breeze, red and white stripes catching the last light of day, stars standing out against the blue field. It's just fabric and thread, really, but it represents something larger: sacrifice, service, freedom, and the idea that these things matter enough to defend. My grandfather defended them in uniform for 30 years. I defended them in my own small way by refusing to let a corrupt HOA board dictate what I could display on my own property. In the end, the flag is still here. I'm still here. And the people who tried to push us around are gone. That feels like victory. Not the flashy Hollywood kind where everything wraps up neatly and everyone cheers, but the real kind, where you've stood up for what matters, paid the costs that came with it, and can look yourself in the mirror knowing you did the right thing. That's the story of how my HOA fined me for a flag, and then federal agents raided their office over something far worse. It's been a wild ride, one I never expected when I bought a house in a quiet Gilbert subdivision, but I wouldn't change it. Well, maybe I'd change the part where I spent months stressed and angry, or the $15,000 in legal bills, or the sleepless nights worrying about what Cynthia might do next. But the outcome? That I wouldn't change for anything. The neighborhood is healing, homeowners have their voice back, and justice was served. And my grandfather's flag flies on, exactly where it belongs, protected by the laws he fought to defend and honored by a grandson who refused to let anyone diminish its meaning. That's worth every fine, every fight, and every moment of the chaos that ensued. Some battles find you. This one found me over a flag, and I'm glad I fought it.